And there's intimacy on the radio, and there's naturalness on the radio that can never be replicated on TV. The marvelous resurgence of radio as a political force in this country.
News-related radio programming is evolving.
There's a huge hole in our dialogue that can be filled by the synthesis of traditional radio and the freedom that comes from a live podcast. You're about to experience Cowboy State Politics live. Here we go. Good morning, my friends, and welcome to another incredible installment of Cowboy State Politics Live. From very high above all the puerile and insipid forms of Wyoming mainstream media, this is Cowboy State Politics. I, of course, am your illustrious host, David Iverson, firmly ensconced behind the silver Cowboy State Politics microphone and broadcasting to you from the base of the Bighorns at the Cowboy State Politics Studio in Sheridan, Wyoming. Good morning, my friends, and welcome to the program. Happy Wednesday. This week is just screaming by, my friends. I can't even hardly believe that it's Wednesday. But we've got another busy broadcast hour in store for you. I've got a lot of stories we're going to talk about, and one of them, to start off with, I'm super excited about. And of course, this is a story from, I think it was last week, that I don't know if I didn't get to it because I wasn't on the air last week, but I found it, and we just have to talk about it. But there's been a new copy of the Constitution that was found, and it's right, an original copy of the Constitution. And it's up for auction now. So we're going to talk about that. And there's a giant sign in the middle of New York that says, "Vote for Trump." Of all places, you know, a sign like that. Now, when the lovely Christine was on one of her trips to Fifth Avenue, she goes there and does a lot of training with Red Ken. So she's there a couple times a year. And every time she goes, she says, "You know, David, you would not believe how many people are pro-Trump." And she said, you know, Trump signs all over the place, people driving around with Trump flags. And you don't really see that on the mainstream media. And I know what a lot of them would say, that, you know, it's just a story. And that, you know, that's just one person, or as Nancy Case would say,
you do a lot of anecdotal things, sir.
We do a lot of anecdotal things here on the program. But anyway, a lot of people are pro-Trump, even though it is New York, and that place has not gone Republican in, well, I can't even remember when the last time it actually voted for, you know, a statewide Republican or a Republican president. Probably President Reagan would be my guess. But anyway, there's a big giant sign in the middle of downtown New York that says, "Vote for Trump." And according to the sign, I believe somebody's trying to sue over it. But anyway, we're going to talk about that and a lot of other stories on today's show. On the podcast, which will be published directly after this program, we're going to talk about the Teton County Fairgrounds again. I don't know if you remember this or not, but a year ago, I did a show called How to Steal a Fairgrounds. And what had happened is I got my hands on some documents from the Democrats that are pushing for, you know, what they call affordable housing in downtown Jackson. And the only thing that you should think of, well, two things that you should think of when somebody says affordable housing. One is it means government subsidies. So it's your tax dollars paying the rent for somebody else. So there is no quote unquote affordable housing without government subsidies. And the second thing that you should think of is rabbit cages. That's exactly what they look like. Tiny, tiny, tiny apartments that are all slam-packed together in one giant building. At the time that I published that last story, there hadn't been an apartment building built on 1 acre of what the Teton County Fairgrounds are. But now, a year later, that building is built, and there's some question as to whether or not the county wants to move the fairgrounds and then develop affordable, quote unquote, affordable housing on that site. Well, as it turns out, Luther Probst, the chairman of the Teton County Commission, who also happens to be the husband or boyfriend, or I don't even know what he is. But anyway, the significant other of Democrat Representative Liz Storr. Yeah, an elected Wyoming state representative is closely tied. I mean, she's the husband or longtime boyfriend of the chairman of the commission, who has made, let's just say, some questionable statements to the SLIB board, the State Lands and Investment Board. See, what happened is Teton County offered the developer of this building, and I'm going to cover the whole story on the podcast, but these are just the high points of it. But they were going to pay him $1.25 million, and apparently they didn't have that cash, so they went to the SLIB board to ask for ARPA funds to pay for that. And in the midst of all of that, excuse me, both Luther Probst and Mike Giroux, the senator from Teton County, repeatedly told the SLIB board that they are not planning to move the Teton County Fairgrounds. So let's see here. Which one do I want to go with first? Let's go with Luther Probst. Again, he is the chairman of the Teton County Commission. Listen to what he says.
Commissioner Probst.
Good morning. Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the board. I'll be quick. I had planned on not speaking, but I just want to make one point about the lease term. As chair of the Board of County Commissioners in Teton County, it is an awkward relationship, as we heard earlier, with lots of moving parts, but I just want to stress that the county is fully committed to the fair. And I think the term of the lease is a less significant indicator of our commitment than what we've done over the last few years. And we've built a new exhibit hall. The old one was 3,500 square feet. The new one is 8,500 square feet. It served as a firehouse for a couple of years as we were rebuilding our main firehouse, and it's now been converted back to an exhibit building. We spent $1.3 million just in the last year or so on that conversion. We're going to have a ribbon cutting in the spring. I invite everybody in the room to join us. But we're fully committed to the fair. You see that in the exhibit hall. You see that in the
Okay, all right. Well, he goes on and talks about all the money that the county has spent on the fairgrounds. And, that is evidence that they are fully committed to the fair and rodeo grounds and fully committed to it staying where it's at right now. Now, if you're unfamiliar with the town of Jackson, the fair and rodeo grounds is pretty much right smack dab in the middle of town. And it's a historic fairgrounds. Well, all of them in Wyoming really are. You can't really have a Wyoming town without a fair and rodeo grounds. But anyway, so that's Luther Probst. And he says, we're fully committed to it. And we've spent all of this money. Well, it's true. They have spent a lot of money. And if it were in any other town in Wyoming, $1 million here, that would be a lot of money. Later on in the soundbite, and he just kind of drones on, which is why I cut it off. But later on, he says, well, we spent $65,000 last year on equipment, and we spent $65,000 on equipment this year. Well, a better question to ask is not how much you've spent on the fairgrounds. It's what the fairgrounds is worth. If you're going to turn it into rabbit cages, which is what their plan is, that chunk of property, roughly 12.3 acres, I think is what it is. That's worth about $100 to $150 million. Think about it, right? You develop that whole thing, you got a bunch of rabbit cages, you're charging $600 to $800 a month in rent, which, by the way, the only way that you can do that in Jackson is if it's heavily subsidized by your tax dollars. But anyway, that chunk of property is worth, in excess of $100 million. And so when you compare that to the sums that Luther Probst just mentioned, that's peanuts, right? $65,000 is nothing when you're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars. Now, the truth is, in an episode I published last year called How to Steal the Fairgrounds, I showed you the documents of where these people are planning to move the fairgrounds to some other to-be-determined site. But here they are in December of last year in front of the SLIB board, swearing up and down that they're not going to move the Teton County Fairgrounds. So much so that here's their senator, Mike Giroux, basically saying the same thing as Luther Probst. Take a listen to this.
In addition, though, if I would just make one last comment before I leave, I've lived in the town of Jackson for 45 years. The first house I lived in the town of Jackson was above the rodeo grounds. All 45 of those years, I've lived within 3 blocks of the Teton County Fairgrounds. All 45 years. As a former town councilman and a former county commissioner, along with former county commissioner and former Senator Leland Christensen, former Representative Andy Schwartz, the 3 of us served in what I like to call the golden era of the Teton County Commission. And we served together and we built a building on the fairgrounds, a rodeo indoor arena. We allocated the dollars. The county has allocated millions of dollars towards that arena. We were the catalyst for that to solidify the rodeo grounds and the fairgrounds at their present location. As you've heard, there is no plan to move the rodeo grounds. We have, in my history, we did have plans to try to move. We had numerous votes on it, and the public always to move it to get more room to expand the rodeo, and they were all
right. Well, he goes on and on and on, and he repeats it about 2 more times that there's no plan to move the Teton County Fairgrounds. The problem is, though, that's not exactly the truth. Remember, that whole exchange there was at the slip board meeting last December. But if you go to, some of the letters that have been written from Luther Probst, the chairman of the Board of County Commissioners in Teton County, there absolutely is a plan to move the fairgrounds. In fact, there was a letter. Let's see if I can find it here real quick. Let's see here. More information. Here we go. Hold on. Going through a lot of tabs on my internet browser here. Here we go. All right. So this letter is from Luther Probst. And again, he is the chairman of the Board of County Commissioners. And it's dated, let's see here, September 16th of 2024. So just a couple of weeks ago. So remember, and let's just make sure we got the timeline right. Last December, they're telling the slip board there's no plan to move the fairgrounds. Let me quote you this paragraph here. And again, this is from a September 16th, 2024 letter from Luther Probst and Maureen Murphy, who's the Teton County clerk. And up in the header, it also has Natalia Macker, who is the vice chairman of the Teton County, Teton County Board of County Commissioners. So let's see here. Along with staff, they will quoting now from their letter, along with staff, they will be exploring other management arrangements, including possibly Parks and Recreation of the City of Jackson managing the fairgrounds during the non-county fair times. The Teton County Fair Board will also work with county staff to look at the possibility of moving the fairgrounds. End quote. So this is just last month. The chairman of the Teton County Commission, Luther Probst, is saying, hey, there's still plans in the works. But that's not all, my friends. From the Buck Rail, July 18th of 2024. The article's about a candidate forum for the Teton County Commissioners. And let's see, let me scroll down here. Hold on just a second. Here we go. Let's see here. Okay, affordable rents. Anyway, in the Buck Rail article, and I can't seem to put my finger on it right now, but anyway, Mackey says that, here we go. Found it. And I quote from the Buck Rail, July 18th of 2024, quote, an audience member asked the 3 to share their stance on the future of the fairgrounds. Rooks said he did not support the development of the fairgrounds for affordable housing, praising the location's, quote, rich Western heritage. Both Macker, who is a current Teton County Commissioner, and Carlman said they'd be open to, quote, finding a new home for the rodeo and fairgrounds elsewhere in the county if the right location could be identified. End quote. That's from July 18th of 2024. It was 6 months after they told the slip board, no, we're not going to move it at all. One more item of note about that slip board meeting. There was 2.5 hours of citizens testifying against moving the fairgrounds, against developing it for rabbit cage affordable housing. There was 2 people who voted in favor of it. One of them was the developer who is going to benefit from the development. And it was the developer himself, Tyler Davis, who was asking the SLIB board to pay Teton County $1.25 million, which was going directly into his pocket. My friends, you need no better lesson on how to steal a fairgrounds than what's happening in Teton County right now. You know, the last time I was there, last couple of times, I was given 2 times ago, actually, I was given a hat that said, "Make Jackson, Wyoming again." And if you're wondering why I try to cover more stories from Jackson, it's for 2 reasons. One, I really like the place, and I really wish that it were a part, did reflect Wyoming more than it already does. And second, because there is a conservative movement in Teton County that is trying to expose everything that these Democrats are doing. I mean, if you're going to go to the SLIB board in December of 2023 and say, no, there are no plans to move the fairgrounds. And then, roughly 9 months later, 10 months later, you issue a letter saying exactly the opposite. I mean, you're lying to the SLIB board. You're lying to the governor, the secretary of state, the state treasurer, the state auditor, and the superintendent of public instruction. The entire state government you're lying to. And you're doing it so that you and your developer can personally benefit from it. I mean, again, my friends, we're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars here. It's not pocket change. And the corruption, the depth of the corruption in Teton County is absolutely breathtaking. And I don't know how else to put it, my friends, except that it is just absolute corruption. And that's one of the reasons why I cover it like I do. Well, there's the break music, so we'll go ahead and continue after the break. I'm going to talk about that 200-year-old copy of the Constitution that was just found. So stick around. We'll be back after the break. You can listen to Cowboy State Politics live every Monday through Friday at 10 a.m. on the Independence Network. Make sure that you subscribe and follow the Cowboy State Politics podcast. You can do that from the website, cowboystatepolitics.com, or anywhere that you get your podcasts. That way, you'll make sure that you won't miss a single episode of Cowboy State Politics. Cowboy State Politics is sponsored by FreedomGoldUSA.com. They are the working man's gold company. The economy is in turmoil. The stock market pretty much is out of control, and you never know what's going to happen with your finances or your income. One way that you can shore up everything is by investing in gold and silver. Go to freedomgoldusa.com/David for a free interview to discuss your options and find out if gold or silver is right for you. One more time, that's freedomgoldusa.com/David. Welcome back to the program, my friends. David Iverson, Cowboy State Politics live on the Independence Network, on Facebook, on Twitter, on YouTube. It's almost like I'm omnipresent, my friends. Anywhere you go in the Cowboy State, you cannot escape Cowboy State Politics, and neither can any of these dastardly redcoats. I mean, and that's what they are. When you're talking about stealing part of a town's heritage, I don't know how better to describe what you're doing than just fiendish. And it's all about money, hundreds of millions of dollars, and it reaches all the way up to the top levels of our state legislature, when you have a state senator who's saying, yeah, there's nothing going on here with the fairgrounds. Nope. We'd have no plans to move it. And then your chairman of your county commission says, oh yeah, by the way, we're still open to that discussion. It's lying, and there's no other way to put it. But moving on, I mentioned before the break that there's a copy of the Constitution that's been found. It's been lost for over 200 years, and it could sell for millions of dollars. And it's up for auction right now. From The Blaze, and I quote, "To some people, the contents of a decades-old folder found in a North Carolina mansion's filing cabinet might just look like a stack of old papers," appraiser Ken Farmer said. But when Farmer opened the folder last year, he believed he might have found the rarest artifact of his career. Inside the folder, he found a copy of the United States Constitution that was dated 1787. On the final page, Farmer inspected the signature of Charles Thompson, the Secretary of the Continental Congress at the time, with a magnifying glass that said it looked authentic. The document, Farmer said, was one of the first copies of the Constitution that Congress sent to the original 13 states, colonies, for ratification. Farmer suggested that the owners send the document to Brunk Auctions in Asheville, North Carolina, where the document will be auctioned off. This is about a week old, so it was auctioned off. The opening bid is $1 million, but auctioneers said they expect it to sell for millions more. Quote, "Every time I have it in my hands, I still get goosebumps," Andrew Brunk, president of Brunk Auctions, told the Washington Post. "This is far and away the most exciting thing that we've ever come upon." Imagine that. You're going through the filing cabinet of an old mansion, and you find a copy of the Constitution. I guess it ought to give you warning that, maybe you shouldn't just start throwing stuff away. You should actually you might want to look at it when you're cleaning out your relative's house or whatever. But pretty cool. An original copy of the Constitution from 1787. Really, really super cool. Maybe over the next break, I'll see if I can find out what it actually sold for. In New York, of all places, there's a giant lit up sign that says "Vote for Trump," and it towers over the New York City after a judge's ruling. Quote, from The Blaze, "A giant Vote for Trump sign lit up the sky in upstate New York Monday night after a judge's ruling determined that the sign is permissible despite grumblings from local Democrats." I don't understand why they would be mad about that. At around 7:15 p.m. on Monday, a crowd gathered to witness a 100-foot Vote for Trump sign light up atop the Sticker Mule facility in Amsterdam, New York, a city of some 18,000 residents about 35 miles northwest of Albany. Whether you're a Democrat or a Republican, the sign is an uplifting thing for community enthusiasm. The event would not have happened except that just 2 hours earlier, Montgomery County Supreme Court Justice Rebecca Slezak lifted a restraining order against the sign and the brains behind it, Sticker Mule CEO Anthony Constantino. A representative from Sticker Mule apparently approached Amsterdam officials back in August about the planned campaign sign. However, the company rep was instructed to get a permit and some zoning variances before moving forward with the project, the New York Post reported. When the company apparently failed to follow instructions, a legal team working with Amsterdam Mayor Michael Cinquanti, a Democrat, and other city officials then filed a lawsuit, claiming that the sign presented, quote, "a dangerous distraction and would impede the traffic flow." They also worried that people would stop and take a selfie with the novelty sign, all at the risk of injuring other operators. Those arguments failed to persuade Justice Slezak, who determined that the sign was far enough away from major thoroughfares that it would not pose any danger. The sign is currently and clearly visible from New York State Thoroughfare. Slezak also gave the plaintiffs until October 18th to refile their case. So, no doubt the Democrats are going to appeal the judge's ruling, but pretty cool that in New York you've got a giant 100-foot sign saying "Vote for Trump." As it should be. America's Democrat-run cities, including the city of New York, Chicago, San Francisco, Seattle, some of our great cities, having been run by Democrats for a really long time, have been laid waste. Crime is through the roof. Vandalism is crazy. And if you missed all of the smash and grab footage that was shown on television, almost nonstop for months, it seemed, with robberies just going unprosecuted, murders going, people running around killing each other with no recompense at all. Democrat cities have become a disaster. And so to see a 100-foot vote for Trump sign in New York, really, I find kind of astounding. Not that there aren't conservatives in New York. Certainly in upstate New York, it's far more conservative than is the city. But my friends, there is one solution to fixing a lot of the problems that we have. And I'm not saying that Trump is the end-all, be-all of, going to save everything in the country, but he's certainly going to be 10 times better than Joe Biden. If you want to look at the source of a lot of America's problems, it's Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. And I said on yesterday's program that we ought to just start calling it the Harris administration, because that's really what it is. I don't think that Joe Biden has made a single decision for a really long time. I think it's been Harris or Jill Biden or no doubt the troop of radicals that surround that administration. Christine and I were sitting around watching TV last night, and I just looked at her and said, I can't imagine a world in which our country would elect Kamala Harris. And just think about it just for a second, how stupid that lady is, how she's trying to pull the wool over the entire country's eyes to get elected. And when she's asked point blank, pointed questions, she can't answer any of them. I mean, just the latest example of how dumb Kamala Harris is. This happened on the Colbert Report. She went on there to kind of push her campaign. And just listen to this for just a second.
Tim Walz, I have to tell you, someone asked me recently, what's the last big decision I made that was a gut decision? Mm-hmm. And when I was looking at potential running mates, there are incredibly talented, experienced, wonderful people. And ultimately, I chose and asked Tim Walz because just my gut told me that he will be what I think we want in our country.
Governor, just to follow up on that, the question was, can you explain the discrepancy?
All I said on this is I got there that summer and misspoke on this. So I will just, that's what I've said. So I was in Hong Kong and China during the democracy protests went in. And from that, I learned a lot of what needed to be in governance.
Thank you, Governor.
So Kamala Harris is asked, well, what was the last big decision you made? And she said, choosing Tim Walz. Whoa. If that is the level of incompetence that we can expect from Kamala Harris, we're in a heck of a lot of trouble, my friends. We have to get President Trump elected. And again, I don't agree with President Trump on everything, but I have to tell you, he's far and above a much better president than Kamala Harris would be. And in the truth be told, President Trump is on my list, definitely on my list of the top 10 presidents. He might be in the top 6 in my mind. Let's see if I can count them off. George Washington, definitely my favorite, not because he was the first, but because, everybody ought to be measured according to George Washington. Probably Thomas Jefferson would be next. Abraham Lincoln. Let's see here. Ronald Reagan, of course. Donald Trump. Yeah, I guess we could put him in the top 5. But clearly an amazing president and certainly better than Kamala Harris. Coming up after the break, The Federalist has a really good piece about what really Kamala Harris is up to. And it's their assertion that she is going to revive the worst aspects of FDR's socialist agenda. And I can't say that I disagree with them, but we'll get into the article after the break. But first, an absolutely outrageous profit timeout. know if you've noticed this or not, but it's hunting season. And one thing that you can be absolutely certain of is while you're tromping around in the boonies, at some point, it's going to snow. A lot. And you definitely want to make sure that you keep your feet nice and toasty warm. The best way that you can do that is to order a pair of socks from the Buffalo Wool Company. They are the warmest socks that I've ever put on my feet. To get you a pair, go to their website, thebuffalowoolco.com. Trust me, you won't be disappointed. Wyoming is one of the most sought-after places to live. There's a lot of people that want to move to our great state. And if you're thinking about selling your house to one of them, you need a real estate agent that you can trust. That agent is Rebecca Bextel at Compass Real Estate. She's lived in Jackson for almost 20 years and has her fingers on the pulse of the real estate market. Last year, she sold almost $25 million worth of property. So if you're thinking of buying or selling, give Rebecca a call. Her phone number is 307-699-3519.
I've never felt the freedom like I do. I feel stronger every day, don't you? Well, I can show you how. A new day, a new way. Watch out, I'm only gonna get stronger. A new day, a new way. Watch out, I'm only gonna get stronger. A new day, a new way. Watch out, I'm only gonna get stronger. A new day, a new way. Watch out, I'm only gonna get stronger. I've never felt the freedom like I do. I feel stronger every day. I'm only gonna get stronger.
Watch out. Cowboy State Politics is only going to get stronger. The program is only going to continue to expand. From every county in this state to every state in this nation, it's Cowboy State Politics. Welcome back to the program, my friends. David Iverson, Wyoming's conservative voice, documented to be almost always right 99% of the time. It's a record that nobody else can even come close to, and they really shouldn't even try. Well, that's not true. I wish they would try to get things right, but it's not looking great for the cow pie, at least. They've hired a new news editor, managing news editor, whatever they're calling him. And apparently in the news business, the higher your qualifications, the better product you turn out. And their new managing news editor previously worked at the Washington Post. Now, I don't know about any other newspapers, but I'm pretty sure that the one owned by Jeff Bezos, if you're going to get him to sign a paycheck for you, you're probably not a conservative, and you probably don't have a conservative bone in your body. So we'll wait to see what happens with the cow pie, but I don't think things are looking too great for them. You know, on Monday's edition of the podcast, you know, I talked about how their new morning show is absolutely, there are so many words I could use to describe it. Conservative is not one of them. Crap is, well, I don't know. I mean, I guess if you're into that kind of thing, but one of my problems with it is the guy has the classic radio voice where everything is exaggerated, and it's, it goes something like, well, I'm down here at the car wash getting ready to interview everybody from that's driving a Tesla to a Yugo or something like that. But it's this constant exaggeration of the voice. And to me, it just sounds like nails on a chalkboard. But that's pretty much his voice the entire time. And, I did a little digging into Jake Nichols. The guy hasn't voted since at least 2018, which tells you, in my mind, that tells me a lot about you. If you don't even think that voting is important, you and I are not the same. We don't have a single thing in common. And, I guess it's just another reason to listen to the Independence Network and just ignore everything else. But anyway, so let's get to that Federalist article I was telling you about before the break. And it's entitled, Kamala Harris is poised to revive the worst aspects of FDR's socialist agenda. Now, if you're listening to Cowboy State Politics, I'm just going to assume that you know that it was not FDR that got us out of the Great Depression. In fact, most of FDR's policies kept us in the Depression longer. It was a giant socialist agenda, even before the term socialist had been really invented yet. There's this guy that worked with FDR, and his name was Stuart Chase. He wrote a book called The Road We Are Traveling, and in it he lists the top 10 things you have to do to achieve what he called Project X. Because, like I said, the term communist and socialist, well, communist had been invented, but socialist really hadn't been yet. So he called it Project X, and it's all of the Democrat playbook items that you would think. Government control of healthcare, government control of your money, government control of gold, a retirement system, all of those things. I'll see if I can get a hold of a copy of The Road We Are Traveling so I can quote it for you. But really, everything that FDR did kept us in the economic doldrums far longer than we needed to be. And it actually was World War II that dug us out of the Great Depression. Well, Kamala Harris, in some ways, is going to be the reincarnation of FDR. From the article, and I quote, "At the Economic Club of Pittsburgh, Democratic presidential candidate Kamala Harris recently said that she would, quote, engage in what Franklin Roosevelt called bold and persistent experimentation, as he had told the 1932 graduating class at Oglethorpe University. She did not mention FDR's vision of, quote, remaking the world, which included fundamentally changing our popular economic thought," and that's a quote, by the way, "to see a wiser, more equitable distribution of the national income, redistribution of wealth. Instead, she said she would seek, quote, practical solutions, and even declared, 'I'm a capitalist.'" Kamala Harris is the furthest thing from a capitalist. She said she's been working with entrepreneurs and business owners for her whole career. No one has ever yet been able to verify whether she worked at McDonald's or not. My bet is on no. She has never actually worked a day in her life. She also professed her belief in, quote, an active partnership between government and the private sector. And by definition, that would be fascism. Fascism is where there is private ownership of property, but the government controls everything. So you may own the business, but you don't get to decide what happens with it. Anyway, she sounded a lot like FDR at the Commonwealth Club in San Francisco in September of 1932. There, he called for a new economic constitutional order built together by, quote, the enlightened administration and the enlightened businessmen, who together would adjust production to consumption. So in other words, straight up socialism. Indeed, the desire to control production and fix prices was the aim of the largest contributor to the Roosevelt campaign, Wall Street speculator Bernard Baruch. He got the wish that he paid for, the NRA, the National Recovery Administration. Similarly, Harris supporter and billionaire Mark Cuban is vying for the position as head of the Securities and Exchange Commission and calling those who call Harris a Marxist idiots. Well, she is a Marxist. She was raised by a Marxist. Her dad is a Marxist. So what do you expect is going to come out of her? Marxism. It was natural that Harris would quote Roosevelt. Biden referenced FDR in his speeches, especially in his last State of the Union, where he invoked the four freedoms, which became the basis of his campaign before it was usurped by Harris. The media hailed Barack Obama as the second coming of FDR, with the November 24th, 2008 Time magazine cover showing Obama posed as FDR in a convertible, clenching the characteristic cigarette holder. But as Ben Shapiro pointed out, Roosevelt's bold, persistent experimentation actually prolonged the Depression. So also warned James Freeman. Relying on Amity Shlaes, Freeman noted that FDR's impulsiveness made it impossible for business to plan ahead. And that's one of the problems that the Democrats currently have, is they continue to pass laws that are absolutely impulsive, and they don't give any consistency to business. If you don't know what's coming down the road in a business, it's very hard to plan ahead. You don't know if you got to hire people or not hire people, or raise wages, or, expand your business or buy new equipment. You don't know any of those things because you might end up paying it all on taxes. Indeed, FDR was barely capable of keeping a sustained thought, flitting from one subject to another, like Harris does in her word salads. He would tell two advisors with diametrically opposed solutions to compromise. He would incorporate contradictory statements into the same speech. He was ignorant about economics and made no effort to learn. Prejudices learned in childhood guided his foreign policy. Yet, he felt himself qualified to plan the economy and the lives of Americans. Sound familiar at all? FDR experimented, and he really did. He followed the economic theories of his brain trust, the cornfield philosophers, with PhDs, as John T. Flynn called them, instead of letting prices bottom out and the economy recover as it had after World War I. The Brain Trust ordered farmers late in the spring of 1933 to plow under their crops and then taxed the processors. The NRA set prices, driving out small business. So the National Recovery Administration, one of FDR's famous acronyms, was all about price fixing. And in fact, businesses would put signs in their front window with the whole NRA logo, and it was an eagle in it. And it was all that they're in bed with they're on board with all the price fixing. So the result of all this, the price fixing, the NRA plowing under the crops, was food shortages and increased prices for people who are already hungry. Can you say inflation? Though it has a different cause, I mean, the result is the same. Higher prices to produce everything, just trashing the economy left and right. So Harris, quote, first ever federal ban on corporate price gouging by food companies promises the same results. The only way that you get a ban on price gouging is if you're engaged in price fixing, which is the exact same thing that the NRA was up to. Another experimental idea was to confiscate the gold that citizens had been hoarding, quote unquote, hoarding. Average Americans who had tried to protect their investments were ordered, by threat of a 10-year prison term and a $10,000 fine, to hand in gold bars and even Christmas gold coins. FDR then determined the price of gold, sometimes by multiples of, quote, lucky numbers. But Baruch kept his gold. Today, politically connected stock market speculators, in other words, those married to the former Democratic Speaker of the House, use advanced knowledge about legislation to sell stocks at a profit. Insider trading. That's about the only way that somebody goes into Congress poor, like Joe Biden, and comes out worth $100 million. It's the only way that happens, is that you have advanced knowledge of legislation that's coming, so you know whether to buy or sell stocks. Similarly, Harris's economic policies would not provide the opportunity she promises to all equally. Just as FDR doled out federal funds to court votes, federal funds will be doled out selectively. She promises to increase the startup deduction from $5,000 to $50,000 and provide low and no interest loans to small businesses. On what basis? I mean, what can you do that? I mean, how does somebody qualify for one of these no interest loans? Will the loans be forgiven, just like student loans? As business owner Chad Jackson asks, is even a $5,000 loan needed to start a business? No, it's not. I started the highly successful Cowboy State Politics with $100 and a kitchen table and my computer. That's it. And it's grown into what I consider to be a fairly successful business. Now, I don't have any employees yet, but still pretty successful business, the most listened to podcast in the entire state. So no, you don't need a giant loan to start a business. On MSNBC, after her speech, Harris said that she would cut the red tape involved in housing and low-income housing construction. She explained, quote, some of the work is going to be through what we do in terms of giving benefits and assistance to state and local governments around transit dollars, and looking holistically at the connection between that and housing, and looking holistically at the incentives we in the federal government can create for local, word salad, man, I'm telling you, create for local and state governments to actually engage in planning in a holistic manner that includes prioritizing affordable housing for working people. In other words, she's just going to dole out money to people who claim that they're going to build so-called affordable housing, just like the rabbit cages in Jackson that we talked about at the top of the program. Out of this holistic mess, we can gather that federal assistance will be contingent on where the housing is built, near public transit. Such stipulations indicate more red tape and an exacerbation of the housing crisis largely created by government. Her $25,000 down payment assistance for first-time homebuyers, she explains, would mean creating the ability of that working person to build intergenerational wealth. Well, first of all, intergenerational wealth is not built or started by the government. The only way that you get there is by making the money yourself. But like FDR, she wants a redistribution of wealth. Oh, there's the break music. So we'll get back and finish this article up after the break. More FDR, more Cowboy state politics up next. You are listening to Cowboy State Politics Live on the Independence Network. You're not going to find a selection of better news, entertainment, and commentary than right here on the Independence Network, with great voices like Joey Carenti from Just Blame Joey, Ken Pendergraft from The Ramble-Roon, Tom Kelly from Wide Right Turn, and the lovely Christine from The Hair Affair. And of course, my program, Cowboy State Politics, Wyoming's most listened to political program. Also, don't forget to check out the articles section at the website, independencenetwork.us. It's loaded with op-eds, commentary, and news from all around the Cowboy State. You can listen to the Cowboy State Politics podcast anywhere that you get your podcasts. iHeartRadio, iTunes, TuneIn, really any of them will work. But the easiest place is just to go to the website, cowboystatepolitics.com. There you can find all of the shows, as well as any of the articles that I might bring up during the course of a program. That way, if your name is Joe Biden and you can't remember if you had your pudding today, well, I probably can't help you with that, but I can definitely tell you why you should have never ran for president. And now, back to our program. Welcome back to the program, my friends. David Iverson, Cowboy State Politics Live, burning through another busy broadcast hour on the Independence Network, Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, everywhere that you could find that we could possibly broadcast. I'm there, almost omnipresent. That's why this is the most listened to podcast and political show in Wyoming. Now, I know that the Cow Pie is going to claim that they've got the most listened to morning show. Probably not true. But there again, he really never talks about anything that's of consequence anyhow. So why would you listen to it? You should just tune in to Cowboy State Politics on the Independence Network and just leave it alone. So before the break, we were talking about FDR's legacy and how Kamala Harris really, when you get down to it, if she knows what she's doing, she's going to try to revive it. And that should be a terrifying prospect for you, because it only means that it's going to further the economic problems that we're having right now. Much of what we're seeing, almost all of what we're seeing, is a result of government intervention and mismanagement from the Harris administration, her and Joe Biden. And there's a reason for it. They are socialist radicals. They are Marxists. And there's no way to get around it. It's not hate speech to refer to them in that way. You're accurately describing the actions that they have taken and that they are going to take. Kamala Harris is saying it out loud. that these are the policies that she's going to take up. In fact, she's a big fan of Nikole Hannah-Jones. If you don't remember who that is, Nikole Hannah-Jones is the founder of the 1619 Project. In fact, Kamala Harris called it a masterpiece that told the, quote, truth of how the very foundation of our country was built on the backs of enslaved people. That's not even remotely true. The 1619 Project has been roundly disproven by just about every credible historian that that you could possibly go to. Has completely, and I don't want to use the word debunked because it doesn't quite get to the level of disprove the level at which the 1619 Project has been disproven. I have my tongue tied up there a little bit. But this country was not built on the back of enslaved people, rather completely the opposite. Now, it's true at our country's founding, you did have Jamestown and you did have Plymouth. Those were two completely different visions of this country. Now, if it were built on the legacy of slavery, you would have had a much bloodier history, that you wouldn't have had founders that decided to start a revolution. And to find out the real reasons why we started the Revolutionary War, you need to read Thomas Jefferson's first draft of the Declaration of Independence. The biggest portion of that, the biggest paragraph, the biggest reason why we needed to break from Britain was because of slavery. Now, that piece was removed from the final draft of the Declaration of Independence because they had to have all 13 colonies sign on to it. It was only later at the Constitutional Convention that the really smart guys figured out a way to end slavery relatively soon. And there's a number of things that are in the Constitution that I could show you that absolutely that is the end goal of them. But Kamala Harris doesn't look at things like that. She sees that our entire history is one of slavery and being built on the backs of the downtrodden. With the Democrats, they seem to think that quoting FDR will magically reassure voters. Vice presidential candidate Tim Walz tried to salvage a disastrous debate by paraphrasing FDR's nonsensical statement about having nothing to fear but fear itself. That doesn't really make any sense when you think about it. We do have things to fear, and a lot of them are running for president in Kamala Harris. Now, the history books, overwhelmingly written by FDR fans, quote his line about fear as if it were a gem of profundity and cast the blame for extended depression on other factors, such as obstructionist Republicans and judges. Some of them argue that FDR did not spend enough money. The fact that he was president during a crisis of depression and war, plus his long-established celebrity status as a Roosevelt, etched him into the national memory as a hero. But when you look at what actually happened, FDR was no hero, and he really wasn't that great of a president. Historian David Kennedy, which I really like David Kennedy, admits that the Great Depression was a catastrophic economic crisis that Roosevelt failed to resolve, at least not until World War II came along. But FDR had larger purposes. In 1937, as the Second Depression hit, FDR, have you ever heard about the Second Great Depression? Well, FDR pretty much created it. He worried that economic recovery might be politically premature. It might dismantle the fragile edifice of reforms that he had instituted, and it might weaken the executive branch. So, Roosevelt's reforms and his power in the executive branch were more important than the well-being of Americans, whose life expectancy was actually declining. According to Kennedy, the president knew the Depression offered, quote, a rare political opportunity, and Roosevelt made the most of it to the nation's lasting benefit. And, though that last word you can put in quotation marks. What is assumed to be the lasting benefit, which includes things as unemployment insurance, Social Security, banking deposit insurance. But these programs' costs are borne by consumers. Americans' taxes pay the deposit insurance, while too big to fail financial institutions were bailed out in 2008. Average Americans lost their homes. Under Democrat Green New Dealers, politically connected companies such as Solyndra and Blue Whale Materials get the loans and contracts. Obama's Make Work plan, with huge signs announcing the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act of 2009, it didn't go anywhere. Those loans went to people who absolutely were not going to pay them back and pretty much just stuffed all that cash in their pocket and laughed all the way to the bank. Like FDR, Kamala Harris is interested in growing the government for political power and transforming the country. If more Americans understood the real FDR, they would be able to see that they do have something to fear: another FDR-like administration. And it's really hard to get past all of the propaganda and brainwashing that you learned in school. I myself had several teachers that thought that FDR was a great president. Now, I had a couple of them that absolutely knew that he was not the savior of the Great Depression, that he didn't fix it, that he didn't solve it, that it was World War II. But it takes an honest history teacher to admit that. A lot of what we see in schools right now is nothing short of political propaganda, that they don't really tell students the truth. And, why should they? Because they're being paid by endless budgets, even in Wyoming. The WEA, the Wyoming Education Association, they're suing the state of Wyoming right now, saying that they don't have enough money, that we are not adequately funding education, with absolutely no way that you can judge a teacher's performance. Yes, our graduation rates are high, but that doesn't say anything about what students know. And it's not until we actually start learning the truth about our history that we're going to be able to avoid some of the pitfalls. And that's the point of history, is so that you learn from the past and you don't repeat it. You don't dramatically increase regulation and spend us into oblivion and then think that that's going to get us out of an economic crisis. The truth is, the government cannot create investment. The government cannot create business development. That's the phrase that we hear all the time here in Wyoming: business development. We've got to develop businesses. Well, the truth is, the government can't do that. It's impossible. You cannot recycle tax dollars, money that has already been taken from somebody else, to foster businesses, to create more tax money. It's a vicious cycle, and it's one that doesn't work. And unless we get rid of politicians like Kamala Harris, we're going to continue to be in these economic doldrums, which that's where we're at, guys. If you've been to the grocery store recently, Christine and I went to the grocery store yesterday, and I think we had, 5 or 6 bags full of groceries, and the bill was $250. Now, granted, we eat pretty well, so it's not like we couldn't pare that down a little bit, but just think about that. We looked through our Walmart orders. I guess this was a couple of months ago, and I just suggested to Christine, I'm like, hey, why don't you look up and see what the price increase on one of your Walmart orders was year over year. And it was pretty well close to 100% increase. Absolutely amazing. And all of that is directly because of the policies of the Harris and Biden administration. That their continued money printing, they're spending at a clip that I don't even think that FDR probably could have understood. But it's all created by them. Well, we've burned through another busy broadcast hour on the program. On the podcast, I've got a great discussion of that whole Teton County Fairgrounds thing. I'm going to play all of the audio, including an excerpt from the episode I told you about, the how to steal a fairgrounds. So you're going to get a pretty clear picture of what's happening in Teton County and how, and this should come as no surprise to you, but how the Democrats are lying to those people in power, the slip board, how they're going to use the fairgrounds for their own purposes. They've already said that. In fact, the documents that were obtained by Cowboy State Politics, they absolutely say that. And there's no doubt about it. It's clear as day. All of these folks are admitting that they want to take up the land in downtown Jackson that is now the fair and rodeo grounds so that they can make hundreds of millions of dollars off of it. So all of that is going to be on the podcast this morning. I'm going to publish it pretty well directly after I finish this program. So stay tuned, give it about an hour, and I'll have it posted. But for now, from the base of the Bighorns at the Cowboy State Politics Studio. I'm David Iverson, and this is Cowboy State Politics.